Arguably, the last 80 years of world history have been shaped by the actions and infamy and aftershocks of just one man, Adolf Hitler. The world war he would hurtle Germany into would see the final retreat of old powers like Britain and France, and the rise of the United States of America and the Soviet Union as rival nuclear-armed superpowers. The human toll of this globe-spanning conflict would be staggering and unprecedented, with an estimated 75 million people losing their lives, many from mass bombings, disease, and starvation. And most insidiously, Adolf Hitler would proceed over the most organized and focused attempts to eradicate an entire ethnicity, Jewish men, women, and children from the face of the earth, an act of genocide powered by industrial technology and with little precedent elsewhere in the thousands of years of recorded human history. When the Allies would finally reach the death camps in the last year of the war, 6 million Jews had perished in the Holocaust. It is October 2021, and here in the United States, millions celebrate Halloween, adopting the guise of monsters and ghouls. It is fitting then that this month we take a look at The Meaning of Hitler, directed by the husband and wife award-winning filmmaking team of Michael Tucker and Petra Epperle. This is a new documentary that looks at how Adolf Hitler, his image, legacy, and ideology continues to haunt lives, politics, and the shaping of Western history, from Charlottesville, streets of Berlin, and even the historic Red Square of Moscow, right up to today. This film joins a growing library of films Michael and Petra have made, artfully chronicling our times, from Gunner Palace, The Prisoner, or How I Planned to Kill Tony Blair, How to Fold a Flag, Fightville, and Karl Marx City. And now, Michael joins us to speak about his work as one of the directors behind The Meaning of Hitler. Let us listen to the theatrical trailer and then meet our guest.
Our understanding of Hitler is central to our self-understanding. And if anyone can advance the understanding of Hitler, then that is well worth undertaking.
Well, good luck.
We've seen Hitler's dogs, his women, his cars, his food, his generals, his secretaries, his secret weapons, and his drug habit. Never before seen footage in glorious color. Fascinating fascism. Which begs the question, is it possible to make a film like this without contributing to the expansion of the Nazi cinematic universe?
Unfortunately, you cannot put Hitler on a psychologist's couch.
Bipolar disorder or schizophrenic, I think any psychiatric diagnosis has been assigned to him.
The problem that we have is not that the Nazis were inhuman, but that they were human.
It can start again. The world of nationalism.
Nazis! Ihr seid Nazis!
They were looking for a savior.
And that is the danger of the times we are now living through, when the very concept of truth itself has become questioned.
The minute you're trying to give a rational explanation for an irrational sentiment, you're going to be lost.
I think we're lost. We have demagogues now that can reach untold numbers of people instantaneously.
If there's no limit to what you can say, it's easy to believe there's no limit to what you can do.
History is not propaganda.
The Nazis wanted to hide. We want to discover.
We only want to get to the truth in history. And if this history can be rewritten, any history can be rewritten.
Welcome to The Ask. I am Weiss Azimi, and today I have a very special guest, Michael Tucker, the co-director of The Meaning of Hitler. Michael, let's start right off the top here. I understand that you and your co-director, your wife, in fact, Petra, discovered the thread that would eventually become The Meaning of Hitler while making your previous feature, Karl Marx City. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how you found that thread while working on Karl Marx?
Well, we were filming in 2015 in the former East Germany. Petra is East German. Karl Marx City was about her family's relationship to the Stasi, to the secret police, or rumored relationship. And while we were filming there, the timing had it that we witnessed some of the first mass demonstrations against immigration policy. And these weren't like a couple thousand people. One night there were 30,000 people, and seemingly ordinary, but also mixed in with some hardcore neo-Nazis. But that night, there was a point we were filming and an enormous crowd turned to us and they were chanting Lügenpresse, lying press, which is sort of straight out of the Nazi word book. And it was like, what? And, and a few minutes later, people were walking by carrying torches, and it was like, this is not just the usual whatever, this is the beginning of something. And years later, we've seen that the extreme right has gained about 25% of the seats in many of the German states. So from this sort of popular movement to actually having a real stake in this democracy. So that sort of led us down this path to ask these questions. And then we started developing the film. And then Charlottesville happened, which of course, yesterday was the 4-year anniversary of that. And these questions are being mirrored all over the world. How is it possible that these ideas are coming back and so strongly, and especially with young people?
It's very interesting to hear about your direct experience seeing the resurgence of right-wing politics in Germany while making Karl Marx. Around that time period between, I'd say, 2015 right up until, I would argue, the last 4 years under the previous administration. I think what makes your film so important is that it's not really a story just about a resurgent right in Germany. There has been arguably a right-wing wave across many parts of the world. And I'm sure that, you and Petra were cognizant of this shift in politics, both in Europe and South America, parts of Asia. Did that feed into your need as storytellers to take on this as your next big project?
Well, there's an underlying, so many things were going on. There was what was happening with anti-immigration and sort of like these, what are called these identitarian groups in Europe. There was Brexit was happening. There was UKIP, and also people like Tommy Robinson in the UK. Certainly, Brazil, pretty much anywhere in Eastern Europe, Russia. It was also interesting, at these demonstrations in Germany, the most commonly flying flag was Russian. And a lot of this stuff makes no sense, and it's all sort of tied together, not like it's a grand global conspiracy, but these groups feed off of each other. And, you'll see right-wing groups in Portland, Oregon wearing shirts, referring to South American dictators, So it's that's what's most troubling about it. And in addition to the fact that it really is with young people. I mean, these are not like some graying, aging boomers, holding on to their David Irving book. These are people who have been attracted to this freshly.
It's highly topical, and I'm glad you pursued the story within this film. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the creative decisions that went into the meaning of Hitler. Your film has a very dreamlike quality behind it, in part, especially as your story shifts between interviewers, key locations associated with Hitler's life, and historical archival. This is really pushed forward by your excellent score and a haunting shot setup that reoccurs throughout your film, a Daimler-Benz hood ornament. You almost get the sense that you're driving in Hitler's staff car at times, which is a terrifying thought in and of itself. Can you share with us how you landed on this style of presentation for your film? And could you also share with us how you ended up working with your daughter to provide the very arresting voiceover narration that made this film a truly family affair?
From the start, it was always going to be something of a road movie. And then we were looking at some ways to ground it. It's not that interesting shooting out of the window. And we met a really interesting expert who sort of went through, who had actually created an itinerary of every single day, almost to the day of Hitler's life. So we sort of started following that, picking out some key things, but then he was pointing out, what kind of cars. I mean, Hitler didn't drive himself, but he loved being driven in Mercedes, and he always had the best of the best. And that's when we started in Berlin. We actually had a Mercedes, and we were shooting that way, and then we figured out a better way to do it, which was, I wouldn't use the word comical, but slightly more effective. That symbol also actually appeared in some of Eva Braun's films. You can see there's color footage of Hitler in his Mercedes driving through the German countryside, and the Mercedes logo or hood ornament is so present. So that was, one of many things that we decided to sort of sprinkle throughout the film to sort of keep that travel narrative together. And then as far as my daughter, she did the narration for our last film. And with this film, we tried many different approaches. There are actually 2 narrators in the film. And we decided that this female voice was a great counter to this very more male voice of God that is reading pages from the book that the film is based on. So it sort of helps even it out and grounds it more in from our point of view.
It was artfully done. In addition to your as you were explaining, your desire to sort of sprinkle that aesthetic within the film. And I felt it was highly effective for myself. I really did feel like I was on this journey with you and Petra, exploring the meaning of Adolf Hitler and the significance both for the past and our present and future. I also noted that you as filmmakers decided to put yourself within this story. There are several scenes that feature your wife, Petra, in her role as the sound person for your film.
Right.
And her expression as she is witnessing or experiencing some of the things that you filmed for this documentary is incredibly expressive. And it sort of helps push the shock, horror, and astonishment that I felt as a viewer. Could you share with us your choice to put yourselves in as characters? You appeared very briefly, walking up, I think, to Hitler's old village, I believe. I could have been mistaken with that shot.
No, that's actually one of it's one of our producers who we were staying with in Austria. That was just sort of put as sort of like a kind of this little bit of an Easter egg. But yeah, it's a hard. I think anyone who starts making documentary films, it's always a problem. In fact, many of us, when we start, our first impulse is to put ourselves in our films because it seems like we're at the center of it. We're holding the camera, and we've done it before, and then we sort of drifted away from it. But at the same time, I think that so many films that are made now, I mean, the technology has become so great that films have become so slick and actually quite bloated, where you have really enormous crews where you used to have like a Verite crew would go out and be like, the Maisel brothers, one guy with a camera, one guy with a microphone, and, they would sit down and they would edit a film with a handful of people. Now we're seeing these things with, literally dozens, if not hundreds of people working on them. And I think sometimes people will even forget, when we're on a scene or shooting anything, it's only ever the two of us. I mean, I wouldn't really want it any other way. I mean, in fact, many times I just prefer to be by myself doing things. And I think people have lost sight of that, and things have become much more rigid and formal and constructed. Like the idea that you're going to interview someone and you're going to have like 3 different camera angles. And of course, like every film has a drone shot now. And, it's incredibly predictable rather than getting down to like just creating some sort of intimacy. And I think that was our goal, both with interviewing people and trying to connect them into a world of conversation, and also with the travel in the film was just to sort of put people there, obviously trying to capture things that are, interesting to the eye, but that it feels natural, that it doesn't feel completely like, there are 8 people standing behind the camera managing everything.
It's incredibly well said. And, I personally, in my career, I took a page out of your book for my own work as a filmmaker. Your sort of your inaugural freshman effort, Gunner Palace, was greatly inspiring. I'm glad to see that you've taken that methodology and applied it to much of your work moving forward, as far as keeping the resources you need to make your film small and accessible and manageable and intimate, as you put it. You've spoken earlier, previous interviews, about your desire to include a broad range of top experts, from historians to archaeologists, psychiatrists, and even a radio specialist, to provide insight in the phenomena and legacy of Adolf Hitler in this film. Some names that received top billing in your documentary include individuals like Deborah Lipstadt, I must have the pronunciations, you must forgive me, Saul Friedlander, Francine Prose, and Yehuda Bauer, and Nazi hunters Betty and Sergei Klarsfeld. Could you share with us what it was like speaking with these people and how you prepared for these interviews that essentially powered this film?
Yeah, well, many of those people are, as far as, Hitler studies or Holocaust studies go, they're sort of like, these are top drawer names. And, people were very, they were very open. I think only like one person said no, but people were really generous with their time. And, as we met each of them, what emerged was, this conversation they've been having, and this sort of, their understanding of history has evolved so much over the decades they've been in it. And that's really what we wanted to transfer to the audience, was it's, history, or history as we know it, is not this fixed thing, it's this work in progress. And that so dovetails with this American moment we're in, where we're, talking about critical race theory, or we have like the 1619 Project. These are new, fresh, younger understandings, of what our history is. And it's important to not see it as fixed. I mean, there have been enormous, and also things that I just did not know, there have been enormous debates about the history of the Holocaust, not even about denial, just about like how we tell this history and who can tell it. And that was fascinating, to have access to these people, to also try to construct a narrative from them that they would be able to watch and go, yes, that's coherent. I mean, some of it's pretty, goes into some pretty high level territory idea wise, but the goal was to make it as accessible as possible, that it's not just this one note thing.
Moving on to one of my favorite scenes within your film, Sherry Linden, writing in The Hollywood Reporter, points out that one of the strangest stops on the Hitler World Tour is a restricted U.S. Army storehouse of confiscated Nazi art, which includes pieces made in tribute to Hitler as well as his own work. Why was it important for you and Petra to get access to this storage site and treasure trove of Nazi-era art? And what did you make of the U.S. Army's effort to painstakingly restore a gigantic bust of Adolf Hitler after it had been defaced?
They didn't so much beautify that. They've restored it, they preserved it. What's funny about that bust is that I forget who captured Obersalzberg. I'm not sure if it was the 101st or the 82nd. I think it was the 101st. But anyway, when they came across this bus, they kicked it. So, it had boot marks all over it. And then someone drew a dick on the side of Hitler's face, which was kind of funny because it's like, it's what you could, you've seen soldiers in the field. It's like what they do, right? So that was funny. But, that place is literally like the place from Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, it has every artifact since like 1776 is in there and carefully cared for, and every uniform, every weapon, art, letters, you name it, it's all there. They have 4 Hitler watercolors, this bust, plus a lot of art that was deemed sort of toxic that the army took, and some of it has been returned to Germany, but most of it will be held there probably for eternity, just because it's seen as too toxic to see the light of day.
It's an incredibly memorable scene, and I just hope it draws people into the story that you're trying to weave here. Some critics who have been reviewing your film have noted your decision to include a notorious Holocaust denier, David Irving. I thought personally it was incredibly important to include a figure like that in this film, just so you understand what are the consequences to not paying attention to history, to not making an effort to truly understand the consequences of, let's say, a person like Adolf Hitler or an authoritarian figure like him that inflicted great pain on the world and great pain on the Jewish people specifically. I'm curious as to why you chose David Irving, because obviously this is a anti-Semite who is in his last years of life. He comes across as almost a pathetic figure in your film. There are plenty of neo-Nazis that have come to prominence in the last 4 years. I'm curious as to why you chose this individual to represent that voice in your film.
Well, first, the book that the film is inspired by, The Meaning of Hitler, Sebastian Haffner, the author, had encounters with Irving in the late 70s. He was one of the first people to sort of point out the problems with the history that Irving was presenting, his denial of Hitler's involvement in the Holocaust. But more importantly, Irving, when people talk about denial, one thing that they sort of miss, this isn't a debate. There isn't anything really to be debated here. When it comes down to it, Holocaust denial is just a version of anti-Semitism. It's not about being right or arguing about supposed facts. It's about inflicting more hurt and more cruelty. And that's sort of where, when we filmed him, that's sort of where it landed. That's captured, and it's captured quite well, where you can see this isn't about an argument. This is about him traipsing through Treblinka, sort of expressing this cruelty.
I'm very glad that you included him as a counterpoint. Well, not necessarily a counterpoint, but a logical conclusion of where anti-Semitism eventually leads a person. In a previous interview, you mentioned that this film eventually turned into a multi-year effort for you and your wife, Petra. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about the individuals and organizations that help support your filmmaking for The Meaning of Hitler. Could you please share how your executive producers, Marie Teresa Gerges, Anthony Dobkin, and Jeffrey Lauer, contributed to the support for making this film?
Well, usually when we make a film, we just start doing it. And in this case, Anthony came in very early and helped support a few trips to Europe. And then Jeffrey Lurie's company Play Action came in later and supported, a pretty large percentage of the budget, and we covered the rest. But this is, as far as the filmmaking process, it's most often for us that we will usually basically take a film all the way to the finish line without anything. This is quite rare. for someone like Jeffrey to be involved. And we were like extremely thankful for it because it allowed us really to take the time needed. I mean, it was a very, very deep, complicated project. So super thankful for his support.
How did this project come to his attention?
Just, through our world.
That is a valid answer. Essentially through conversation, through friends and colleagues and reputation. You spoke about this earlier about your approach to filmmaking and how you really like to keep it down to what is essential and not to sort of burden yourself or Petra with the need to carry around a circus in what you do. I noted here that you and Petra both serve as directors, producers, and screenwriters for this film. And I believe you were the cinematographer for the picture. And that's a huge advantage to you when it comes to getting out into the field and pursuing your work. But I'm interested to hear about your fellow producers, Dana O'Keefe and Mike Lerner, and how you connected with them and how they worked with you to this film out and made.
Dana is someone we've worked with since the beginning of our careers. Mike is someone we started working on just for this project, who had relationships that we didn't have, and you just want people who can add something to the team. So it's like, which commissioning editors do they know, who that can open up different channels. But again, sort of back to your original thought there, for me, I think it's most important, and I think it's a mistake that a lot of younger filmmakers make now. They focus too much on like those relationships. Well, I don't really think they're important at a certain stage, but the most important thing that anyone can do is know how to do everything. Because I think people, they wait too much for permission to make a film, So like when you contacted me, it's sort of like, well, what's stopping you? Call those guys up and go do it. Right? You're there. So, and I'm glad that you did it, because had you waited, nothing would have ever happened. No one cares more about your story than you.
It is incredibly well said. And once again, any prospective filmmaker who's listening to this interview, you cannot go wrong with Mike's advice here. Heading back, as I understand, we're nearing, I think, the end of our interview here. You mentioned you do have to leave in a couple of minutes. Reviewer Owen Gleiberman circles back to a point made by one of your interviewees, Professor Bauer, who argues that Hitler was a perfectly normal person. His psychological problems were no different from those of millions of others, suggesting that the Nazis were many things, but ultimately they were human. It's something that we're all capable of. Is Owen on the right track here? And I'm just curious, there's that part, right? The fact that there could be a Nazi in all of us potentially. But what was one of your most important takeaways or discoveries while working on this film? Because, every time you set forward on a documentary, it's often with the question that you're trying to answer. I'm really curious, as you set out with your initial question for the meaning of Hitler, what new questions or new answers did you run across, you and Petra, while working on this effort?
Well, you just basically said it yourself. I think that observation from Yehuda Bauer that these people were normal. We always look for an explanation. We try to explain everything around us. We try to explain Trump because, Trump was influenced by the Russians, or he's a Russian asset, or this or that, or Trump has a psychological problem, or Trump was mistreated by his parents, or this. We're always looking for this thing rather than looking at ourselves and saying, well, what is it about our democracy that can work better? How can we vote better? How can we be more active? It's sort of funny, we're in such a catastrophic moment, and then you walk out on the streets of New York and it's as if nothing is happening. And I have to say, I'm incredibly moved. It's really hard to watch what's happening in Afghanistan. It's hard to, people are so disengaged from all of us. This is all of us. It all started right here. I can see out my window the Freedom Tower. I'm not saying what's right or wrong about it, but it's like we at least should care what's happening rather than just, I just think that in making the film, that observation, we get to make a choice, are we going to follow the cult of this individual or individuals, or are we going to work as a collective? And I think the pandemic represents better than anything that problem that we're having. The politics, selfish, sort of individualized politics, or like these more collective solutions. We're sort of all in it together, and it's amazing how easy the solutions seem to be, but how difficult it is to implement them. I'm amazed in New York City. We thought like, hey, a movie's opening tomorrow, everything's going to be great, and that's not what's happening. It's this is probably one of the last weeks you'll be able to see a movie in New York City. So what are we, like 18 months into this thing? So there's a lot of crazy lessons to be learned in this last couple of years, for sure.
The meaning of Hitler looms as a shadow over our times. I'm very glad that you and Petra went down this road to study the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of right-wing politics, extreme right-wing politics, both in Germany, here in the United States, and around the world. It's a worthy exploration, and yet another film in a long and important growing library of feature films by you and your wife that have chronicled our times. Mike, thank you so much for appearing on The Ask. I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for listening to this discussion between myself and co-director Michael Tucker about his latest feature film, The Meaning of Hitler, together with his wife and co-director, Petra Epperle. You can watch The Meaning of Hitler on all your favorite streaming services, including Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and Google Play Movie. Thank you for joining our discussion here on The Ask.